My first jobs out of college was in editing, writing, that I thought was kind of a waste of time. This boring job that I didn't want to do for the rest of my life, like, toss it out, you've only been doing it for a few years. Looking back now, I didn't know anything about anything. I realized later, as a food person and a recipe writer, it's about having a voice, a perspective that takes me back to being inspired to cook. I loved it. Like, it was exactly what I wanted to be doing.
I'm Grant Crilly. Join me as I travel across the country to meet chefs who are shaping our food culture. We learn about their ups, downs, successes, and heartbreaks. Where they come from, how they got here, and where they're going. Every route is different on the road to cooking. Carla Lalli Music is one of these people who have this deep editorial background, as well as a real legitimate chef cooking technique background. She's got this amazing balance of both. I meet up with Carla. How are you doing?
Good.
What an awesome place. And then we're gonna go zip around Brooklyn and see a day in her life.
We're going to one of my absolute favorite places in the world, probably, which is Archestratus bookstore, but it's also a cafe. And even when it was just a bookstore, the owner Paige has always served food here. So just combining books and feeding people is just part of the vision of this shop, and I never leave uninspired.
Oh my God, I love this bookstore.
Being in a store like this with vintage cookbooks reminds me so much of my childhood, because my mom is a food writer and was a cookbook editor.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I grew up, and she's an amazing cook, and so my whole life she was cooking. My mom's job was really to take other people's recipe collections and turn them into great books, understanding other cooks' points of views and editing their recipes in a way that reflected them, and I think that's what a good editor does. My father's an editor as well. Every paper I ever wrote in high school, it's in my best penmanship, would give it to my dad, and he would put a tiny little pencil mark in the margin on every line where there was a mistake. And he wouldn't tell me if it was grammatical, if it was a spelling thing, if it was the sentence construction was wrong. He would just give it back to me and be like, it's pretty good. I put a few, notes, and you would look at it and be like, what the hell? My parents have been such an important part of the skills that I gained. I can copy edit, write headlines, pitch story ideas, figure out what's wrong with a sentence and make it better. I can also figure out what's wrong with a recipe and make it better. First chunk of my career, I was working in books and working as an editor. I was really bored. And I was like, I cannot do this for the rest of my life. So ultimately I was in between jobs and was on the phone with my dad, and he was like, if you ever wanted to go back to school, this is a perfect moment. The only kind of higher learning that I could imagine really getting value out of was to go to cooking school.
These are freaking dynamite.
They're so good.
Yeah.
The biggest, most delicious arancina you can get.
They're huge, but they're also intensely well made.
Yeah.
So much love in them. They're crispy and juicy and so much flavor in them. I'm trying really hard not to just slug them all.
I spent 10 years in the restaurant world. Starting off as a line cook, I worked in 3-star restaurants, got more into restaurant openings and management and operations. I always imagined myself being a working parent, but working in restaurants as a parent is not sustainable. So to end up at a food magazine was perfect. We're going to Meat Hook, which is my favorite butcher in the land. They are a nose-to-tail butcher. They know where all of their meats come from, and they bring in primal cuts and fabricate them in-house. So I'm looking for 2 racks of pork spare ribs.
Oh.
Today, not too much trim taken off, but they can be in their slab still.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. For me, it's like reconnecting where your food comes from. Like when you see the side of the pig, it's like, yeah, that was an animal that was broken down. And when, especially we buy meat, it's like pre-portioned, pre-packed in a shrink wrap on a styrofoam tray with the little like absorby pad in the bottom.
Little diaper,
and it's
diaper.
like really easy to forget that like what it takes to get here, and that there was, you know, animals and people who raised them and things that it ate.
I mean, anything you have that's got a nice life, a relaxed life, and a great diet,
Yeah.
you can taste that, to your point, in
Yeah.
the fat, you can smell it. And the opposite's so true, to your point, if you're stressed out animal,
Yeah.
poor diet,
Yeah.
not a great ending or last day, it really shows through in the meat.
Yep.
It tastes, it's actually, that's like lactic acid even in the meat too, you know?
Yeah. By the time I got into my first job at Bon Appetit, it's like, right, I totally know exactly how to do this. I saw myself as someone who could talk to cooks, could talk through a recipe, could help troubleshoot, because I understood like how to make food, how to develop a new dish, and I saw a lot of parallels. I felt like it was a full circle moment for me.
Wasn't too hot out.
No, not at all.
Got our goodies.
Fresh as a daisy. Let's make some ribs.
Oh my gosh.
For the spice-crusted pork spare ribs, the process is very simple. Beautiful spare ribs cut into individual bones. Cutting them is really to get all of the surface area possible. So like exposing what's in between the 2 ribs to spices, to heat, to the caramelization. I will tell people a teaspoon of salt per pound of meat. All right, so we want, you can eyeball it, but 3 parts coriander, 2 parts black pepper, 1 part red pepper. The coriander brings this very citrusy, bright, top note sort of a flavor. The black pepper has bitterness and spice, and then the red pepper flakes really just deliver heat and spiciness. We're also exposing the surface area of inside of the spices. It's releasing the flavor, but it's also creating these like craggy shapes and thin parts and round parts, open parts, and the fat that renders off of the pork while they're cooking is going to toast the spices.
Yeah. Oh my God, that looks so good.
You could let this sit for 2 days. You could let this sit for a couple hours.
Yep.
The longer it sits, the better it gets, in my opinion.
Yep. Chefs know this from salting any protein. It's gonna actually make a juicier product later because it kind of cures it a little bit.
Exactly.
And that protein holds on to all that juice later.
While the ribs are roasting at 400, it takes about 40 minutes, but you really wanna just forget about the time and go off of the visual cues. At the end of the cooking process, the fat will have rendered, you will have crispiness forming on the edges, the spices will be beautifully toasted. There should be plenty of fat sizzling in the bottom of the pan. When the ribs are done, I like to rest them. All the juices redistribute, and then the way that I serve them is with a handful of cilantro with a lot of fresh, bright lime juice. 90% of this recipe is hands-off, so you're letting heat and time with a short list of ingredients kind of do their work. You just have to show up at the end to eat it.
Spending the day with Carla broadened a few things to perspective for me. She had to go through this trajectory of a lot of learning, a lot of writing, ideation side, and the cooking side to produce something that's very simple for an audience or community to receive is like difficult, or it's a longer journey than you imagine to get there and to be comfortable with like expressing your medium that way.
I just want cooking to be something that people do that enriches their life. Go off script, be in the moment with what they're making, use an ingredient they like instead of an ingredient that they don't really care for. Find themselves in the recipes. that's all we can ask for as cooks.